Welcome back to my channel, Beautiful Minutia. If you're new here, my name is Tiffany and I am doing something just a little bit different today. So I normally would film a wrap up at the end of the month of all of the books that I've read, but I decided that instead I wanted to film it kind of vlog style this month. So as I finish books, I'm gonna record a clip and talk about them. The main reason why I want to do that is that yesterday I finished my first book of the month and I really want to talk about it now, and I don't really want to wait till the end of the month. So that's kind of the inspiration for me choosing to do it that way this month. I'm not really sure how it's going to work out, if I'm going to like it better than a monthly wrap up. So today is Thursday, November 10th, and yesterday I finished Assassin's Apprentice by Robin Hobb, and I gotta talk about it. So this book actually was on my 5-star predictions for the year because everyone really loves Robin Hobb, and it's like one of those quintessential like fantasy authors that it seems like everyone really likes, and so I figured that I probably would too. But honestly, I really didn't know anything going into this book at all, except like the main character was like the bastard son of a prince, and that's literally the only thing that I knew about this book. And let me just tell you, this book blew me out of the water, and I was not expecting that. Robin Hobb's writing style is like my kind of writing style, and I just was absolutely immersed in every single second of this book. I loved the world, I loved the magic system. There's actually several different magic things that are happening and abilities that different people have. There's like an ability to be able to bond with and communicate with animals that the main character has in a way that he can actually see what they see and like mentally communicate with them beyond just like telepathy or understanding what they're thinking. Like, it's a much deeper level connection than that. And then there's also the skill, which is an ability to be able to kind of project your thoughts into someone else's thoughts and kind of communicate telepathically. And I think that there's more to it than that, but there's just a lot that we really don't know about that specific magic yet, and I think that we'll learn more in future books. So this is a trilogy, the Farseer trilogy, which I'm sure everyone knows this. I'm probably just saying things people already know, but it's part of this world that Robin Hobb has created, and she has a bunch of trilogies that are set in this world. So this is the first book in the first trilogy, and apparently this is Robin Hobb's debut. So I'm like blown away by her writing even more, knowing that this is a debut. Like, it's super impressive. But I just like absolutely loved this book. I fell in love with the character of Fitz and just felt like very connected to him because we first see him when he is like a 6-year-old boy, and we follow him as he grows up. I'm not 100% sure how old he is towards the end of the book, but he is in his teens. And so this book is really following him as he's coming along and being brought to the royal household. I found the concept of a lot of things that were happening in this book very, very fascinating and intrigues me to want to pick up more. In fact, I just want to read the next book in this series. I want to ditch my TBR and read the next book in this series. I just love it. Like, I loved everything about this. This was like a perfect book for me. If I could give more than 5 stars, I would. And I actually think that this is in the running to be my favorite book of the entire year. I mean, once I sit down and actually tally everything at the end of next month, I may feel differently in terms of it actually being number 1. It may not be, but it is going to be in the top books. And I didn't anticipate that. I was actually feeling a little discouraged about my 5-star prediction list because a lot of the books that I've read off of it have not been 5 stars. And so I was just kind of like, oh no, like, ugh. So yeah, the character development is so good in this. I loved the relationships in it. I loved there's so much political and royal intrigue and like positioning that's happening and plotting, and oh my gosh, it was so good. And I felt like the end of this book, particularly like the last 50 to like 75 pages or so, like I read it at like breakneck speed because I was like, oh my gosh, what's gonna happen? And some of it I saw happening. There's some betrayals and things happening behind the scenes that I was just like, not at all surprised by that. But there was a lot of it that I didn't see coming and a lot of reveals. It's really cool. And I love this style. It's written in a way that's similar to how Brandon Sanderson wrote Mistborn, kind of where there's like these little like chunks and things at the beginning of each chapter, except with Brandon Sanderson, you're confused as to what they are and why they're there. This one, it's not. It's him. He's writing like history of this world and his own history. And so at the beginning of each chapter, he's kind of like addressing something and writing something that is giving you a deeper understanding of the world or the royal court or a specific person who's involved. So that really added to it, I think. Added to the world feeling more explored and more complete, although complete is probably not the right word because there's still so much to be explored and there's still so much that we don't know after just this first book. But this is amazing and I had to come on and gush about it. I am currently in the middle of 3 other books, so I will come back on and update you when I have finished reading more books. So it is update time. It's been a while since I've updated, but I have finished a book, so I wanted to pop up here and update. We're about to walk into our weekly homeschool co-op, but I have a couple minutes. So I finished Rasselas by Samuel Johnson, and I have a little bit of mixed feelings about it because overall I enjoyed the writing style. I felt like there was some really good, like, subtle humor in there. But I do feel like a lot of the philosophical things were a bit long-winded. And it's not even a long book, but this was the group read for Rating Project Gutenberg this month. And so if you haven't heard of Rasselas, because I really hadn't, I knew it was referenced in Jane Eyre and that was all I knew about it. But if you have not heard of Rasselas, it's about this prince who's really wealthy and lives in this like sequestered valley where they're really not allowed to leave. And he decides that he's very discontent with his life and that basically his possessions and his wealth aren't actually bringing him happiness. So he decides he wants to try all these things and leave the valley and try to find happiness. And so he encounters a lot of people and has a lot of lengthy philosophical discussions. And I will say that quite a lot of them made interesting points, and I felt like the language was really beautiful and that there were quite a few quotable parts. I would say it's either 3 or 3.5 star read for me because I'm glad I read it and I enjoyed a lot of elements about it, but I don't think that it's one that I would read again or I would say is particularly meaningful or impactful to my life. So that's my main update for right now. I'm also about a third of the way through Little Men and a little over half of the way through The Devil in the White City. So those are the books that I'm currently working on, and I'll update you again soon. Looks like it's update time because I have finished a couple of things since the last time I updated, so I'm just gonna go ahead and talk about all of those. So the first book that I'm going to talk about is my one definitive book that I chose for Nonfiction November, and that's The Devil in the White City by Erik Larson. This is part true crime and part historical nonfiction about the World's Fair in Chicago, and I really liked both elements of that. There's a lot of architectural references towards the beginning and then just them getting ready for the fair and then like what the fair was like, and I actually loved all of that. There was a lot of tension as to whether or not, you know, the fair would open on time, and I really don't know anything about the World's Fair that took place in Chicago, so I was like, are they gonna open in time? is this going to happen the way that they want it to? And so it was really interesting to read about that. And I also really loved all of this stuff that they talked about that was part of the World's Fair. There was a lot of exhibits that they talked about, a lot of things that had their origins in the World's Fair. And I had no idea things like the Pledge of Allegiance was created for the World's Fair as a way for school children to contribute something by memorizing it and stuff. And the Ferris wheel originated at the World's Fair, and things like Pabst Blue Ribbon and Aunt Jemima's pancake mix. And there's just like a lot of things that debuted at the World Fair that were not around before. And so that was just really cool to read about that. So then the other storyline part follows H.H. Holmes, who was kind of like America's first serial killer. You've probably heard of him. He had like the hotel that was built in Chicago and had all kinds of creepy rooms and vaults and weird things in it. And it was really interesting to read kind of about his origins and then what happened and how he was finally caught and all that kind of stuff, and the mystery surrounding that we still don't know how many people he actually killed. And so there's a lot of things in here that were really fascinating about that. I ended up giving this book 4 stars instead of 5. Writing wise, I felt like it was 5 stars. I was super engaged, really enjoyed it, but I did have one issue, and I was actually warned about this by a friend, Holly. She told me that though this is billed as a nonfiction, there are elements to it that actually are speculative and imagined. And so going into this, I knew that, but it really still kind of bothered me that this is billed as a nonfiction, but we get to these scenes where Holmes has his last interactions with his victims and then kills them, and no one else is present for these conversations. No one else knows how it went, or even how he did it, or sometimes even his motivations and things like that. And he acts like this is definitely what really happened. And if he had said, here's how this conversation might have went, that might have been different, but he did not do that. He presented it just like he presented the rest of the book. And to me, that was just a little off-putting when it's billed as nonfiction, especially considering how meticulously researched the rest of this book is. I felt like that was just a little bit of a downfall. And then there's an author's note at the end where he's like, yeah, there was some stuff that I inserted, but I feel like if you had done the research that I did, you would have come to the same conclusions that I did, that this is how this probably played out. I'm like, well, maybe, but you still should have kind of had like a little disclaimer in there. I also finished a nonfiction work from Project Gutenberg for the Reading Project Gutenberg readathon, and I read a pamphlet by Ida B. Wells called Southern Horrors, and it's about lynch laws in the South. And it's just a small little thing. I think it's about 40 pages, but it took me a while to read it because it's brutal, honestly. Like, it made me angry, it made me feel sick, like it was hard to read. But I think that despite the fact that it's very haunting and very disturbing, I think it's actually really important for every American to read that, to know like where we've come from, where we've gone wrong. And she really lines up like the excuses and reasoning behind Southern white people saying that this is why we're doing this, and like, oh my gosh, I can't believe how the rates of Black men raping white women has like skyrocketed, and so now we have all these lynchings. And her kind of showing like, no, it's not more than normal, you just want an excuse to kill us. And so it was hard to read, but I'm so glad that I did. And lastly, the other book that I have recently completed is The Joy Luck Club by Amy Tan. I actually read this for a reading vlog where I did a 24 and 48, or attempted it. So I will link that reading vlog, because at the end of the reading vlog, I really kind of discuss more in depth my thoughts on this book. I loved it though. It is so melancholy at times. It's about 4 women who immigrate from China to San Francisco, and then they have families, and it parallels their lives with their daughters' lives, and all 4 of their daughters were born in America. And so there's kind of this cultural divide that's happening between them, and it's so sad to read about that. My main complaint about this book is that it's a lot of people to keep straight. We have 4 mothers and 4 daughters. And because the storylines are so separated, I would have to flick back and forth to try to remember whose story is lining up with whose. There's 3 sections in the book. The first section is like the mothers when they're in China as children, and then the second section is their daughters in America growing up, and then the third section is the mother's kind of adulthood in China and immigration to the United States. And so by the time I got to the third section, I'm like, okay, so this person with these adulthood experiences, which kid was that from the first section? It was just kind of hard to keep that straight. And so I feel like it might have been too many stories in one book, but that's really my only complaint. Like, I absolutely loved it. I thought the writing was beautiful. I actually tried to listen to it on audio on a walk, and I just like was having trouble because I felt like it was more beautifully written on the page than it was on audio. But I loved this so much. That's my update for right now. In case I did not mention, it is Monday, November 21st. So I'm sure I'll have more updates for you before the month comes to a close, but that's what I have been reading. I will talk to you soon. Hello, I am back again with another update. It is Friday the 25th, I think, day after Thanksgiving, and I have a couple of books that I finished yesterday that I'm going to share with you. The first one is Little Men by Louisa May Alcott. I buddy read this with my friend Alyssa, and we read Little Women together last year, so it's fun to be able to read the sequel together. I kind of knew in my mind that this probably was not going to be as good as Little Women, and I am correct. This story mostly follows Jo and her husband as they have opened this home for boys where they are not only educating them but raising them like orphaned boys, and they have 2 very small boys of their own also. And it was a really sweet story. Like, I really enjoyed like the hijinks of the boys. They were really funny, and there's a lot of sweet lessons and things like that. But overall, I do feel like this book is stronger and it's moralizing than Little Women is. And so I felt like it was a bit much at times, and I felt like at times it was a bit saccharine as well. But I still loved it. I still feel like this was a hug in a book. There's one chapter that made me cry, and I did still just really enjoy it, really enjoyed being back with these characters in this time period, and I'm still going to go on to read Jo's Boys. I have heard some people tell me that Jo's Boys is actually their favorite of the 3, which I don't see how anything could possibly top Little Women, but I am planning on going on to read Jo's Boys. It's probably 4-ish stars, 3.5 to 4 stars, because it was super enjoyable, but it's not one that I'm like really looking forward to rereading anytime soon. Then I also started and finished within 24 hours Wishtress by Nadine Brandes. I have read both of her previous books, Fox and Romanov. I just read Romanov last month actually, and so I saw that this was in my library, and so I requested it because I wanted to check it out. Unlike Fox and Romanov, this is not a historical fantasy. This is just a straight up fantasy, and I enjoyed this one probably less than both Fox and Romanov, and Fox was kind of like middling for me, and Romanov was really good. I really enjoyed like the first portion of the book, and I was really invested in it, and I was really like flying through just because I thought like the world was interesting. I thought the magic was interesting. So basically this is about a girl who is a wishtress, and she has this ability that every tear that she cries can grant a wish, and she lives in a world where there's this special well of talents that you can journey through, and if you make it there, you are gifted a talent. And so different people have different talents, but not a lot of people have taken the pilgrimage or made it through the pilgrimage. So hers is that if she cries, each tear grants a wish. And so then she ends up well, this isn't really a spoiler because it's actually written on the back of the book. She ends up granting a wish to someone that backfires, and then that person then curses her, telling her that the next tear that she cries will grant a wish, but it will actually also end her life. So she spends the rest of the book just kind of trying to close herself off from the world and from emotions, from attachment to the world, and try to get a cure from this curse. I found the world interesting. I found talents interesting. There's another element there as well, and there's very good versus evil kind of thing, especially like within individual people, like discussions that are happening. But I just it kind of fell off for me, quite honestly. I didn't love the main character. I felt like she was just incredibly whiny a lot of the times, and since you're very much in her head a lot, I just kind of was like, okay. She just kind of like wallows in self-pity and self-degradation, and as someone who also struggles with self-degradation, it's not pleasant to read about a character where most of the book that's what's happening. And also Nadine Brandes really loves her insta-love tropes. I think every book that I've read has some level of insta-love, and I actually think that this one is the most egregious by far, because it goes from them meeting and not being very big fans of each other, not even being able to have a normal conversation, to like the next time they meet up, it's like an I would die for you situation. I'm like, okay. So I don't know. I was very disappointed by this one. I'd probably give it 3 stars because it was a fast-paced and semi-enjoyable read. There were elements to it that I really liked, but there were elements that I found kind of frustrating as well. I'm in the middle of a couple books as well that hopefully I'll talk to you again before the end of the month. But there's one book that I'm kind of debating DNFing, so I'm just going to talk about it now. That's Queen of the Tearling by Erica Johansson. This is on my Read or Rid project for the year, and it also fulfills the Buzzwordathon prompt of ending in ing. And this is a YA fantasy / dystopian, I think. I'm about 100 pages in, and it just feels like every other YA fantasy I've ever read. Honestly, it's just feels very bland, but there's supposed to be some sort of dystopian element as well, I think, because they keep referring to places as like New Europe and after this happened, and it refers to like Brothers Grimm fairy tales and certain things. So you can tell this is almost supposed to be like a, I don't want to say post-apocalyptic, I guess just more the dystopian, because this utopia was supposed to be made, and that's why this person came over to this place, was to make a utopia. And instead it's kind of devolved into this medieval feudal type system, and it's, I don't know, it's a weird mix between those two things, and I just like am not really enjoying it so far. It just feels super formulaic. So I may give it a little bit more of a chance, but I have other books that I really want to read that I am reading, and some that I want to get to that I just am like, do I really want this? Also, I bought this from a library book sale for 10 cents, so I don't really feel bad if I end up not keeping it. But yeah, that's kind of where I am with that one. So that's my update for now. There's still a few days left in the month, so hopefully I will finish some of the other books that I'm working on and update you one more time before the end of the month. is the end of the month, so it's time for my final wrap up. It's November 30th, and I did complete a couple more books that I'm going to share with you. By way of update, I did decide to officially DNF Queen of the Tearling. It wasn't vibing for me, and that's okay. So I did complete 2 books. So one of which was an audiobook, and that's The Office BFFs by Jenna Fischer and Angela Kinsey. I love The Office. I have been watching it for years and years and years, and started watching it when it was in probably either 2nd or 3rd season on NBC, and was watching it weekly and stuff, and just have loved the show for forever, have watched most of the episodes multiple times. I loved the show so much, and so it was really fun to listen to the audiobook of this, because Jenna and Angela are talking about their time on the show, and it's just like friends talking to you about it, and it was really enhanced listening to it on audio and hearing their voices. And in addition, there is exclusive content in the audiobook that is not in the physical book. They actually have, like, Creed Bratton comes on and sings a song, and Ed Helms plays his banjo, and Rainn Wilson does the introduction, and they just have different other people from the show who pop into different chapters or who do like little intermissions or things throughout, and I just thought that that was super fun and a really great touch. I think I smiled almost the entire time I listened to this book. Like, it was wonderful, and I loved it so much. I did see in some reviews of this that people said that they really didn't say anything that wasn't already on their podcast, which I think is called The Office Ladies, or The Ladies of the Office, or something like that. And they said that, you know, they've talked about all these things on that podcast, so there's really no point in reading it, but I haven't listened to the podcast. So for me, it was absolutely perfect, and I enjoyed it so much. I also completed 6 Crimson Cranes by Elizabeth Lim. This is a fairy tale telling of, I think it's either called The Wild Geese or The Wild Swans by Hans Christian Andersen. And as you might be able to tell from this amazingly gorgeous cover, this is Asian inspired, so it takes a lot of notes from East Asian mythology, which I absolutely love. I've always been super fascinated by mythology and religious systems of other countries, and so I love that in fantasy novels too. And so this was really fun because it had a lot of different mythology elements to it. The gist of the story is there's this princess Shiori, and she lives with her 6 brothers and her father and her stepmother. And at one point, not too far into the book, she ends up being cursed. She has like this bowl or something over her head that covers most of her face, like from here up, so she's completely unrecognizable, and she's dumped pretty far from home. And at the same time, her brothers are cursed to become cranes. So they're cranes during the day, and then when the sun sets, they take their true forms as humans. In addition, Shiori, if she speaks, every single word that she speaks will kill one of her brothers. So if she were to say 6 words in succession, every single one of her brothers would die. So there's that element too. So she's far from home. She's unable to tell anyone what is going on. And she also has some magical abilities, and magic has been banned in her kingdom and hasn't been allowed to be in it for a very long time. And so that's an element that's really interesting to it as well. I really enjoyed this book. I don't think I'm going to say it's like a new favorite or anything like that, but I am a sucker for fairy tale retelling, so I really enjoyed it, and I enjoyed the Asian elements to it. I really enjoyed Shiori, and then I enjoyed her love interest in the story as well, and how it was very much not an insta-love situation. Like, they really kind of got to know each other, and I really liked that element so much. I do feel like a lot of this book was quite simplistic in its writing and in its presentation, and so I actually feel like this is a book that might work really well for the younger end of YA, and that's something that I'm always looking for as well, because my daughter is creeping up into the age where she might want to read some YA, but a lot of YA is marketed more towards young adult range than high school and teenage range, so there's a lot of content in a lot of YAs that I would find highly, highly inappropriate to hand off to my daughter. She's 10 at this point, but I mean, if she was like 13, there's so many YA books I would not want her to be reading. So I'm kind of cataloging books that I think will be appropriate for her once she reaches that stage. And this, I think, could fall into that category. My one qualm with it is towards the end, it gets really like intensely creepy because they're like these demons who are entrapped and are trying to find a way free, and I don't think that that's very spoilery, but it gets kind of creepy at the climax at the end. And so that's kind of where I'm like, I don't know. So I mean, we'll kind of see when we get to that point with her, but content-wise, this book I feel like is really good. I don't feel like the romance veers into inappropriate territory, which I think a lot of YAs do, that they kind of push the envelope a little bit, and it's stuff that I would not be comfortable handing to my younger end of YA daughter when she gets to that point. So this is a duology, so I do want to read the sequel. I think it's called The Dragon's Promise. By the way that this book ended, I am so intrigued to see where the next book is, because it's taking us, I believe, to a different location. That just sounds really fascinating. So those were the books that I read over the course of the month. Let me know what you think in the comments down below, if you like this vlog style or if you prefer a more traditional wrap up. This is the first time I've ever done anything like this. I have done like weekly vlog updates, but I have never done like a monthly wrap up in the form of a vlog as I've completed books. It does help for me to be able to talk about them a little bit more because they're really fresh in my mind when I'm talking about them. So there's that element as well, but I'm just curious to hear what you guys think. If you prefer this, if you prefer the other way, if it doesn't matter, you know, all that kind of stuff. I'd also love to hear from you in the comments down below. What have you been reading? What was your favorite book that you read in November? I really hope that you had some that you enjoyed. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked this video, please hit like and also subscribe so you can continue to see more bookish content from me. Now I will see you again next time.